So today we're going to be talking about using Roblox to teach ages 8 through 12. And yeah, without further ado, Genevieve, why don't you go ahead and get us started?
Hi everyone, I'm Genevieve. I lead the education efforts here at Roblox. So what I'm going to do right now, I'm going to share my screen. So give me just a second to do that. 1 second, make sure I got the right one. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and bring up my presentation. So just so you know, everything we're about to cover can be found on our education site. It's just education.roblox.com if you haven't already visited it. We have over 100 hours of free curriculum, resources, and tutorials that's actually ISTE certified. You can also follow us at Roblox Edu if you're on Twitter. And if you have any specific questions, please feel free to reach out to us at education@roblox.com. It's real people. It's me and Peter, who is also on the curriculum team, as you know, on the other side. So we're happy to answer your questions. Okay, so today we're going to be covering a few topics. I'm going to give some really quick advice for getting students ready for class. And then we're going to get into some different lesson plans specifically for the ages 8 to 12 that can be found on our sites. If you have questions, we talked a little bit more about some of the nuts and bolts of Roblox Studio and the platform in our previous webinars. Those are recorded if you want to go back and check those out. And we will be talking more about scaling lesson plans up for older students in the next webinar for the 13+ students. Okay. Before we get going, I did want to remind you that if you would like to follow along, I hope you do, as I show you how to create projects in Studio, make sure that you have a Roblox account, a Mac or a PC, and preferably a 2-button mouse with a scroll wheel. Technically, the 2-button mouse is totally optional, but I find it makes life easier for myself and for most adults. I do find kids are strangely more comfortable with the trackpad, but the scrolling in and out can be a real lifesaver. Roblox accounts and the curriculum are free, as is building, creating, and sharing across all of the platforms. But we're also going to go over a couple of our paid social services a little bit more in depth because I got a lot of questions about them. So I'm going to go over VIP servers, and if there's time at the end, I'd also like to cover a little bit about more groups and how that can be used. So those are paid, but they're purely optional and you don't need them. All right, so before class, just kind of like I said right now, reminding you guys, I hope you guys have your accounts. I do recommend that you have your students create their accounts before class if possible. Lots of your students probably already have Roblox accounts, but make sure that they send them who you are or who they are so you can actually know their Roblox names, because we don't disclose real names on the platform for security reasons. And then 2, it'll also be handy when you're going to be creating collaborative projects or groups, or just, you know, you want to know who's who in a server. Okay, and then the other thing, if you have more questions about how to set up an account on our site, we do actually have more information about our recommended requirements, as well as if you scroll all the way to the bottom of this page, we have some handouts and brochures. So we have some handouts that you can actually, are in PDF form, you can send to a parent, just talking a little bit more about digital citizenship, as well as what it's like to learn with Roblox, and some information about the safety features. I find that this tends to help parents feel more comfortable. I know as you guys are, you know, training your students, you also have to educate parents, and oftentimes, you know, even the rest of the teaching community as to like what are the safety features of this platform. We also have some really basic cheat sheets, both for Lua coding and for Roblox Studio, and those could be helpful as well. These are free to download. Okay, so let me go back to my slides. Hold on, I hope I didn't just close them. Oh, sorry, there they are. The other thing I want to say, since this one is primarily centered on younger students, I would be prepared to prompt parents beforehand to be on hand for lost passwords. It's totally natural, it happens, it's just part of the process. So give yourselves a few minutes just dedicated to being like, all right, is everyone logged in? Have them send you a friend request so you can check to see if they're online. And then later you can also, team up with them for Team Create, which we went over in a different seminar, and some other things as well. But just be aware, lost passports are totally normal. Worst comes to worst, they can actually create a new account real quick and then save locally to your computer. And then you can actually, if it's saved locally, you can use it on any account. But if it's saved to their actual account, then you can use it on any computer, which is pretty cool. Okay. So if you take a look at our remote learning page, which I think a lot of you have probably already seen, and then scroll down, you'll see we've curated some lessons for different age groups. These are the ones that we're going to be going over today. And I'm also going to talk about how to scale them if your students are advanced or like on the higher end of that age range, 10 to 12. And then I'll talk a little bit about how you can scale it down if you have sub 10 students. So we're going to do the create an obstacle one. And then it's really nice because just about any age range, this is actually probably one of the most popular lessons for any age range we have. So pacing is going to be strongly dependent on your student's comfort level with a keyboard and mouse, but keep in mind, even if you have younger students, those keyboard and mice skills are really, really valuable. Like they are worth learning in and of themselves, and it's worth nurturing them through. So whether or not they're going to get into coding, that probably depends on how comfortable your students are with reading and typing. And that's something that you can add it in if they're going faster, or if your students are older, you can feel free to add that as well. I'll show you a little bit about the coding as well. All right, any questions so far? I'm just gonna pause for a second. Okay, I'm gonna assume that's no questions so far. So I get asked a lot, how should you actually use the curriculum? I prefer to use our tutorials as a script that I can actually lead the class through using guided practice. So I'll do a step, they'll do a step, and as students get more comfortable, they'll naturally transition to more independent practice as well as more inquiry-based learning. So as they realize what the platform is capable of, they tend to start coming up with their own questions and problems and wanting to investigate solutions to those. So in a class, I'll usually have it printed out or projected overhead as I teach so I can refer to it and I don't forget anything. But since we're online right now, there's a couple different ways you can do it. You can still print things out, of course. You can use a separate monitor as well. Or you can also, or just like go through it and as you are going and use that as like the backdrop. And also you can use something like using like a deck, much like I have right here. So it's kind of whatever you're comfortable with. So I actually just like to have the tutorials up behind me or as I'm walking through, and I'll kind of constantly keep referring back to them and using them as a script that I can talk out loud if I forget, or that. If I have students that are getting ahead, then I can assign them something farther, or I can tell them that they are allowed to read farther. Or if I have students that are getting behind, I can also use this as a reference to be like, hey, you can go back to that page we were talking about before. So, but I do try to make sure I'm constantly referring back. I actually find that as I get more comfy with a lesson, that's when I tend to start forgetting things. So for myself, I try to make sure that I am going through the lessons and I'm sort of referring back to them constantly. So any questions there? Okay. Keep going then. Nice. So what we're going to do at this point then is I'm actually going to walk you through one of our most popular lessons, as I was stating, the most popular starting point, which is about any age, is creating an Obby. You can find this lesson plan as part of our curated lessons on the remote teaching page, which I just showed you. These lessons plans concentrate more on building and design thinking, as well as self-expression, rather than perhaps coding, which makes it really perfect for this particular age group. All right, so now I do have a question and I want you guys to answer. Does anyone here know what an Obby is? you can use that question and answer form. And Laker and Peter, let me know if anyone has an answer.
Sure thing, we'll do. Looks like we've got, yep, we've got some couple of answers here, a couple of people unsure. I definitely know that when I joined the platform, I had no clue what it meant.
Yeah. So we look like obstacle courses. You guys have learning about depth. Yeah, it's an obstacle course. It's just, I kind of wanted to do this because just like any class, like I would actually be asking questions constantly. And even when I am working with my team and let's say I'm having a lesson on English or something, I like to ask questions. And a lot of times I'll even have them interact and like I'll write down answers on my deck. Anyone who's worked with me has definitely seen me like typing live on my deck as I'm, going over something or reviewing something. So yeah, An Obby it's a platformer, it's an obstacle course. They tend to be made out of really basic parts, which is what makes them a nice place to start. They could be themed to just about anything. They could be mountains, they can be lava, they can be space themed. And even though this is such a common place to start, we actually had a student who last year, he was actually even younger than 12 when he made it. He made an obby to help him through depression and to help others who were struggling with depression. So he used the color to represent that struggle as he came out of depression, things became more colorful. And he included tips, and you can kind of see in the background of this picture, there's sort of tips everywhere to help those who are struggling. So you can actually use something even as simple as an obby to really give students a place to express themselves and to theme about according what they like, whether it's serious or whether it's fun, whether it's unicorns or something more serious like this. So I want to point that out because he actually won a game award, which is a big deal. All right. So if I want to get you excited about playing an obby, if I want my attention getter, there's a couple ways I can do that. I can play online with or without VIP servers. There's a lot of obbies on the platform, but these two obbies, MegaFun Obby and MegaFun Obby 2, are probably two of the most popular and well-known obbies. There's new levels to these every single day. This was one of the first games I ever played. And you can create a VIP server for a small amount of Robux that would be limited to your students, which I'm gonna show you how to do right now. Or you can use a local file of an obby you've built, which is what we're gonna do in a second, or the template. So I'm just gonna show you guys this. Don't feel like you have to walk along with this, but I want to show in detail how to create a VIP server since I did get more requests about that. And then true story, online we have Bianca who's run VIP servers with her students, which I'm very excited. All right, so to create a VIP server, the first thing you wanna do is you go to the game page and then scroll down and then click create VIP server. If you cannot create a VIP server, it'll just say no VIP servers available. You can also see here how many players can fit into one VIP server. This is set by the developer, as is the price. So this one is, once you click on it, you can see the price is 10 Robux. So they tend to be about 10 to 100 Robux. 10 is like the equivalent of 10 cents about, or 100 Robux is about the equivalent of $1. It's not really a 1-to-1 ratio, but more or less. So I can go ahead, I can create a new server, I can set the name. I have a lot of servers with the same name. Go ahead, click buy now. And then the price of the server that goes towards maintenance and also part of it goes towards the developer. So here I can configure my server. So if you are playing and creating, so playing and creating, which I've talked about before, has two different requirements. To create, you have to be on Mac or PC, but you can play with any platform. But if you're gonna play with mobile, you have to actually invite them. So this is where you can invite players. But if you're playing with Mac or PC, you can actually just generate this link and you can send them this link. And to click save, and you're ready to go. So now here's a list of my servers. So there's, this is like your standard page. So to find the servers you have, you click on servers. and you can see a list of your servers, and then you can click it. If you want to, you can use the dots to open up the settings. You can shut down the server, which I find really, really useful if you're dealing with a class. As we know, sometimes students don't really like to stop. So I can be like, hey, I'm shutting down the server in 10 minutes or 10 seconds or whatever it may be, and count down and shut it down. And if you want to, you can configure the server and you're back at that page you referred at before. So you can either regenerate the link or invite your players or change the name. And servers are good for 1 month. All right. Any questions about VIP servers before I move on? To actually show you, like I said, you don't have to use VIP servers, but they are an option either if you want to create like a playtime social day, or if you want to just have a way of getting students excited about what they're going to create by showing them something similar online. Okay, then. So it looks like we have one question.
Yeah, so Bob, well, first Bianca, again, yes, definitely recommends VIP servers because, yeah, she's been using them. Bob Irving actually has a pretty good question. So he's comparing it to Realms in Minecraft. Would you say VIP servers are like Realms?
I would say they're kind of similar in the sense that they're a private space that you can just invite your friends to. So it's, you know, only you and your friends. You don't have to worry about the public coming in to that particular game. So, you know, like back in the old days, you had to actually rent a server space and get it set up by some outside third party. You know, now you don't have to do that. It'll just run through the Roblox servers. Oh man, that's so fun. Melissa, you just said that your student actually shared this with you. Nice. All right, so
it does look like, oh, sorry, Genevieve. It does look like Bianca does have a question. Yeah, go ahead, Bianca. What is your question? Please feel free to type it in. Because yeah, again, we do definitely encourage, again, you don't have to use VIP servers, but we do heavily encourage VIP servers in this, especially in this day and age. It just helps, you know, keep people together and helps them kind of know that they're playing with their friends. So
we're waiting for Bianca's question.
Well, we can move on and then we can answer the question later. Oh wait, never mind. Here we go. Sorry for the interruption. Let's see. We've been doing so many parties, but one thing is that we all wish we could hear each other. You have a service that you recommend so that we can hear each other. Our kids are 8 to 10 years old, so probably too young for outside services.
I mean, that's something, you know, we're definitely looking at. The 8 to 10, it's kind of tricky because I can't like specifically recommend anything that is designed for that age range. I can say you can look into third-party chat, but for most of it, you're going to actually have to have parent permission. Most of the big ones, like let's say Discord or something like that, those are designed for 13 and up, or that can actually create their own EULA. So yeah, so it's kind of difficult. Just make sure that you're aware, you know, if there's something like Slack or Zoom, even like I've used Zoom just to have in the background with my friends. So there's things that you can do. Actually, I Zoom and play Roblox with my own team in-house quite often. But once again, make sure that you're doing your due diligence in terms of the security levels and making sure that you're talking to your admins and making sure that they're comfortable with it.
And yeah, and some other free services, I think like Google has some chat services like I think Google Messenger, Hangouts.
Yeah.
Facebook, I think, has some voice things. But yeah, again, I definitely want to back up Genevieve's statement that, yeah, a lot of these services are designed for older kids, and even in their terms of service, don't recommend younger kids use them. Again, it's usually for the kids' protections because, you know, you're connecting them to the whole world. But I definitely think that there are a lot of services out there that you can use, and yeah, just try to see which works, you know, best for you and your students.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I find sometimes even Zoom and then turn off the video. So if you're working with like lower powered machines, so it doesn't take up so much. All right, so I'm gonna move on a little bit. I'm gonna go ahead, share my screen again. Okay, so we've gone through VIP servers. Now let's go back to the tutorial. So the first thing I want to say is usually in a class, I recommend setting up a desktop shortcut because it gives you a little bit more control over the setting. There's fewer distractions. However, if you're teaching online, you're probably not dealing with a classroom computer that is homogeneously set up. You're going to have all kinds of different computers, and sometimes people don't really know where to find their software. So what you can do is, instead of using the desktop icon, sometimes online it might be easier to go ahead and use the web service to bring up Studio. So I think it's easier to use the Studio icon in real life classroom, but online you might want to consider going this way. So on Roblox, like I said, this is the games page. You can click on Create. And then from here, you can actually click Create New Game. And you're going to see the number of templates. So we're going to create an obby. So usually I want my kids to play an obby. So I'll tell them what a template is, and I use this as an opportunity to also show them how to play test. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually create the obby game. So click obby. Or actually, yeah, click Obby, and then you click Create. And that should bring you back to the screen. I have so many games, it's kind of hard to tell what just happened, but it just made this Turple's Place number 38. So now I can click Edit. So this is saved to the cloud. It's tied to my account. I do have the option to save it locally if I want to, but saving to the cloud is nice. I can go back and forth between any computer if I'm here. So, if there are students that one parent and then goes to another parent's, or they have a school laptop and then going someplace else, it's nice to have it tied to the cloud. All right. So talking about what I was talking about earlier, using my tutorials as a script. I've done this a million times, but I do like to walk through and then go with my script. Let's see. So the first thing is you can click on Obby. We're going to talk about closing windows. So as you saw, when I brought up Studio, there was a lot of different windows. We have these extra tutorials, and then we have these toolbox. These are things you don't need right now, and just to prevent distractions and to give more room, you can go ahead and close out these extra windows. So just close out these extra windows on the left-hand side, leave the right-hand side, and you probably don't have the output window if this is your first time opening up Roblox. This is not my first time, so it kind of saved my presets, because I usually use the output window, which we'll talk about later, and that'll give you more space to work with. This is especially important if you're working with laptops. So I have a nice big giant monitor, and that's lovely. But the truth is, most school laptops have little laptop monitors, so space is going to be at a premium. And you're also going to find that students are going to very often be working like half Studio and then half instructions. Like, I just find over and over, this is what students tend to do because they're not comfortable they're not comfortable tabbing back and forth. So quite often this will be their solution. They'll have like half of it over here and then half it over there. Okay. So I'm just gonna pretend like I'm working that way. So this is an obby. You can see it's made out of basic parts, very similar. And I'm gonna play test this obby by clicking on play. So you can't see, like right up here, there's a little triangle. If I click play, then that'll show me the current state of this game. So this is just a starter template, so it's got some parts in it. You can actually move your mouse by right-clicking and dragging around, and you use WASD to move around. Now this being an obby, your goal is to get to that platform over there, so you can use space bar to jump. So I was gonna say, if I don't make it, there you go. What'll happen is it'll reset and you'll be back at the spawn point. So the nice thing about Roblox is the things like the light, the gravity, this reset mechanic is all built into the actual template, and it's built into all the templates, which If you're working in a different platform, a lot of times those are things that you'd have to create for yourself. So this makes it really easy to get going. So what the students have to do is really just sort of fill in the blanks. So if you want, spend like, let's say 30 seconds to 1 minute, just sort of playing with the controls. And then I'm gonna come back to that. So I have my tutorial. Any questions while you guys are playing tasks? Okay, so I don't want to spend too much time.
Yeah, one quick question though, just a reminder. We had a couple questions on where Studio will run. Just a reminder, while Roblox runs on a lot of platforms, iPads, Chromebooks, tablets and such, Studio only works on Mac and PC. So just a reminder of that.
Yeah, Mac and PC, and then you can share out to anything. All right, and then to stop the playtest, you can use the stop. You guys might notice there's the stop and play here. I actually prefer to teach students to use the ones that are up on top. The reason being that as you're changing tabs, that play and stop is not always going to be there, and that can be kind of confusing for students. So even though this is the smaller icons, I tend to try to train them to use these icons rather than the shelf icons, which change depending upon which tab you're on. Okay, so everyone should have stopped their playtest. If you don't stop your playtest, what happens is that you can't actually save changes. Okay, so now I get you guys to make your own obby. And to do that, we're actually gonna start from scratch. A cool trick to do that is if you see there's this X that says close tab and you hover over, right here, there's a little X. If I click it, you don't have to save the change. I'm gonna save discard, that's up to you. It's gonna bring you back to the studio menu with all the templates. So this time, I want everyone to select base plate. Base plate is sort of the most generic template that we have. There's nothing in it except for a base plate. To do that, you just click and it'll start. And now you're in an empty world. I'll give you guys a second to check out. So we have a nice empty world here. So one thing I like to do right here is actually, I tend to teach students to save right away. Having dealt with a lot of broken projects, this is really important to me. So now that we have, this will be your project. So you can go File, we're gonna save our files, and say Publish to Roblox. And this will save it to the cloud. If for some reason you want to save a local file, like let's say you had to use a different account or something, you can say File, Save As, and that will save it local. But Publish will actually publish to the cloud, and it will be a private file unless you set it to be public. So all you have to do is name it. You can add the description that will show up, and then click Create. Give it a second. It is actually doing something, it just takes a second. So the nice thing, if you have the output window, it does actually give you some messages during that time, and you can just close out. You've now saved it. All right. Now, as you saw on the obby, that was sort of a big blank world. The very first thing we want to do is get that big blank world. On the right-hand side, you see the Explorer right here, and the Explorer is a list of everything in your game. So underneath the workspace, which is a list of all the objects in your game, you want to select the base plate. Once again, I'm actually just going to move along within here, and you can see, like, if you guys forget anything or if you want to refer to something, this is all here in the tutorial as well. So you can select the base plate and then just click delete. Just make sure that you're actually selecting it and not the not the name. There we go. All right, so now we're in an empty world. Nothing here. All right. So the first thing I need to do now to create my obby is to create a player spawn. So I'm gonna hover over workspace. This is a way to add in new objects to my game. And if you go down to spawn location, you can click on spawn location, and it's gonna appear in the exact center of your camera. And we can use this later to kind of help us build new things. If I want to zoom in on it, you can use your mouse, like if you want to scroll in and out. You can also select the object, either in the Explorer or in the editor here. I like to use the Explorer and press F. That'll bring it into view. Sometimes it's really handy, like if you, for whatever reason, lost an object, let's say it's underneath terrain or behind things or somewhere else, you can select it in the Explorer and press F. And then just like you did when you're playtesting, you can use your right mouse button to drag your camera around. You can use W, A, S, and D to move your camera, and you can kind of combine them. You can even scroll in and out. All right, so I'm gonna press F again to bring that into focus because I feel like that's the easiest thing to do. Usually at this point, I would also have people play test it because it's kind of fun. They can just see that, like, hey, if you fall off the edge, you will spawn right here and then you'll start again. So that's built-in mechanics. But I want to move a little bit faster because we don't have too much time today. So I'm going to show you guys how to put in a part. So remember what I said earlier, like your parts were actually going to appear wherever the center of your camera is. So you can kind of move your camera around. And then up here is parts. So you can click part and you have a new part. All right, now let's see what this looks like. We're going to click playtest. So real time, we're going to see what this looks like so far. So as you can see, my part has totally vanished. And there's a reason for this. And that's because Roblox is actually a physics engine. It's built on real-world physics, which is why there's some physics teachers who actually use it to teach physics because things will collide and interact with each other. Back in the day, it was actually designed to be physics. So the part has fallen down because in the real world, there's gravity. And like I said, if I fall off, I'm going to reset. That's just done for me. So I'm going to stop my playtest. Because remember, you can't really change anything while you're playtesting. I'm going to select my part. You can either do it here or through the workspace. And then make sure you're on the Home tab and select Anchor. And you can see how it's like outlined in gray now. So your spawn location is pretty much one of the only things that is anchored by default. But all of your parts you're going to have to anchor. And your students will get used to that. Like there's going to be a lot of times they're like, oh my gosh, where do my parts go? Everything's disappeared, everything's falling down. Tell them to anchor it. All right. So, and let's talk a little, this is where like the design thinking comes in. Like, all right, think about your player. You're going to have a player coming into, this is your game. So think like a game developer and think like an engineer. Can a player actually jump from here to here? I think they can. And I recommend sort of looking around. Sometimes you'll find that the part's not exactly where you think it is. You can actually move the part by selecting the move tool. So you can move back and forth, you can move it up and down. All right, so I think this is a good place. So, as someone coming into a game, this should be hopefully like a pretty easy jump for them to make. It's not nice to start people off with really hard jumps. So this is where that design thinking comes in. We're gonna playtest. Now it should stay where it is. And I can jump. All right, I'm gonna start my playtest. So from here, I'll usually have students make maybe say 3 to 5 different parts. I'll tell them like, okay, how the parts, each jump should maybe get a little bit more difficult. And then typically the next thing I teach them is like, how do you change the color? So you see this color and material up here. So you can actually use the color picker to pick a new color. or you can change it over here in the properties window. The properties window is actually a really good thing to be aware of when you start coding. It's going to make things a lot easier. Most of these properties can be coded using the coding language Lua. And you can also change the material. Cool thing to keep in mind is that we are a physics engine. So later down the line, if you're building spaceships or something like that, I will say things like marble are going to be a lot more dense, and they're going to require a lot more lift than if you have a material that's like, let's say, plastic. So here in an obby, it doesn't really matter what material you pick, just anything that looks nice. But as you get more comfortable building, then that's something to be aware of. It's a physics engine, and of course, marble is going to be a really dense material compared to maybe like glass or something like that. Okay, so I'm going a little bit fast, but the other properties that you want to be aware of are scale. So typically I'll have them do a couple of basic parts, and rotate. If you find, this is what I mean, like if you guys don't refer back to your lesson one, then you tend to skip things. So actually I usually bring up this next thing really soon, because usually on new installations, what you're going to find is collisions and snapping are going to be on. So what that means is that when you are moving things around, they're only going to move a certain amount at once. And if you're not used to this, and if you're not aware of what's going on, so right now I have my move is set to 4 studs and rotate is set to 90 degrees. So it can only move 90 degrees at once. Then sometimes new students tend to think that like their studio installation is slow or buggy or not working. But really what it is it's set to these precise movements, which can be helpful if you're building something like, let's say, a city block, rather than being allowed to freely move. So I tend to start them off by turning off rotate and move. That way they can, more freely control. It feels a lot more responsive. It feels a little nicer for them, as well as moving back to the scaling. You can go back and forth. And you can also choose new parts. If you use the drop-down menu here, we've got cylinders and wedges and all kinds of different things. Typically at this portion, I would usually give students probably, I'd say like 10 minutes to go through, and I would say, hey, all right, I want you guys to have 3 cylinders, 3 wedges, and 4 other parts if you're choosing every part, in a different color, or using 4 different colors or something like that. So I might give them some sort of directive to work with as we're going. And of course, once they have stuff going, I'm gonna tell them to publish their game. So publish to Roblox, or you can say Alt-P. I know you don't see anything here, but that did just publish to the cloud. If you want, you can always see the output window, and it's gonna say the example obby was published successfully, but up to you. All right. So really quickly, any questions there? Okay, cool, we're gonna move on. Once again, this is all here in the tutorial, so you can go ahead and follow along with those and get comfortable with them. All right, let's get back to my, so we went over how to play test, creating a blank slate. We also taught about spawn locations, how to make your first jump. No questions so far. Ooh, how does density affect gameplay? Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah.
Thanks,
so, yeah, Ryan. I mean, it'll affect gameplay. It can definitely affect gameplay quite a bit, because again, we're trying to simulate things kind of like the real world. It's approximation, but it's pretty close. So with things like density, yeah, they won't necessarily fall faster just because that classic feather and brick, they're going to fall at the same rate. But if you have things that are that require like forces to like push something, or actually one of the interesting ones, a lot of people like to make like boat games, because we do have water, we do have buoyancy, and less dense things will float. And so you'll notice that if you try to build a boat, like out of wood or plastic, yeah, it'll just stay on top of the water. But again, if you make it out of like rock or marble, it's just going to sink right through. So those things actually can affect gameplay, and those are interesting things to kind of let your students explore, because it does give them, again, deeper understanding of like, oh yeah, of course, this is how the real world works. It would act like that. So a couple of things that we do simulate physically are the density, so that relates to the mass, buoyancy, which is also related to density. We also do friction inelasticity, so like how bouncy something is or how hard it is to push something across the surface. And yeah, Bianca, this is definitely a component of what people talk about when they talk about physics and game design. We've done a lot of the heavy lifting for you. A lot of engines don't have any of this, and you have to say, okay, if something's going to fall, this is how it needs to fall. Again, we try to take care of that hard problem for you, so your students don't have to worry about, if this tower falls apart, I have to make sure that happens somehow. We just make sure that it simulates nicely. But yeah, it's definitely something to consider in your games. And usually I'll tell people to anchor things if you don't want them to move, or unanchor them if you do. Yeah, and if you are trying to teach physics, we do essentially basic Newtonian mechanics. So if you do want to do, say, like projectile motion, that would be a really good one to teach with this. Also, we have a lot of things like springs and stuff like that. So if you're teaching things like that, we've simulated a lot of physical systems, so you can kind of play around with that, and depending on what you want to teach in physics.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun to create like Rube Goldberg machines or something like that. There's definitely Rube Goldberg machines on the platform, but you can't look them up very well because Goldberg's a real name, so we censor it. But they're on there, as well as like dominoes. There's Domino Mountain you can check out using the same sort of like physics teaching. So any of those like classic Newton experiments you might do with students to demonstrate those laws, you can actually do in Studio. So it can be a lot of fun. All right, so let me go back to share. Right, so here is a good stopping point. Like if you're working with younger students, they can work on this. I've seen like the youngest students work on this like all week. Particularly if you're giving them some examples, if you want to make them think critically about their theme, or you can use some of our collaboration tools like Team Create to like create a larger one. You can create checkpoints. So for younger students, you can do that. If they're ready, then a lot of times what I recommend is moving up into just like a little bit of coding. So one of my favorite 2-hour workshops to teach is I spend maybe the first hour on working on these sort of creation things, as well as just getting set up and ready to go. Actually, probably more like 45 minutes. And then I'll spend like the last hour 15 minutes, just starting off on a little bit of coding. So we only have a few minutes right here. So I'm gonna actually show you real quick a little bit about Intro to Coding game design. And here, this is what the, I can scale. So if you find this lesson plan, you can find it's like on our very first page. So the first part is this classic Obby. The second part is more, it's like how to get into script. And they're gonna be able to create a brick that just changes every second. It's gonna change colors and loop through indefinitely. So go there. And you can see here's our lesson plan for this particular one, 2 hours. We have our ISTE standards listed out, our learning objectives, and we also have some recommended time. I would say you might want to scale up or down depending upon the age of the students. I've done this lesson plan with ages 10 if they were ready for coding. Age 10 can be a little back and forth. You have to know your students. Are they ready to code or not? Are they comfortable typing, or maybe they haven't had exposure to computer skills, and so you just want to give them that mouse and keyboard time. All right, so I'm going to show you guys a little bit. Like a lot of times what I'll do here, you can actually get like on the side, the tutorials are listed. So I can just come back here and be like, all right, let's talk about creating a script. And we can talk about Lua. I can read off of here. And sometimes, if it's a lesson I haven't done very often, you can definitely read along with it or provide this to them. So server script service is where I usually start off creating scripts. And to create a new script, you're going to hover over it. And then you'll see the first one is actually going to be scripts. So it's pretty easy to find. So we have that frequently used section at the top. Now I have a new script. Right? Probably the first thing I want to do is actually rename my script. To do that, you can double click or you can right click and select rename. If you have students that are younger, I recommend just saying right click rather than saying, you can also, of course, use shortcuts, but I would say right click rename. And then say like, okay, this is my practice script. All right, so I have my practice script, and here we have a little bit of Lua. It's a print statement. And as I did earlier, I brought up my output window so you guys could see that save message. But if you don't have your output window up, because it's not up by default, your students will have to bring it up. You can go to the View tab and select Output. And the cool thing about Roblox is it's not like it has to compile. It's not like coding is done in a different place in the creation. They're very, very tied together. If I press play, you can actually see the output from my script that is there, that string variable, or sorry, that string data type is actually printed. So this is, you can start with your classic way, hello world, and let's change that message. Make sure you press stop, because you can make changes, but it doesn't save unless you press stop. And in here, I like to teach a little bit about error messages. So if I were to, let's say, delete this parenthesis, we now have a nice red line being like, hey, something is wrong. And if you hover over the red line, it's going to tell you like, hey, it expanded a parenthesis. You can go ahead and put that back in. Or let's say I forgot something. I'm actually going to go ahead and play test this. If I click this error message, that error message will take me to whatever just went wrong. The other thing I like to do sometimes with teachers at this point is it doesn't matter how far indented in this is. This could be, there's no white space concern in Lua. So when you actually get into creating more advanced code like if-then statements and conditional statements, you're not going to lose a whole entire script just because you missed one indent, which is such a savior when it comes to teaching. I've taught a lot of Python. Indents have been the bane of me. All right, so stop. And you can see like I made changes and it's warning me like, hey, you made changes. Like, do you want to save it? I'm gonna say yes this time, but it's probably just, you know, like it's gonna warn you, it doesn't save it automatically. Here, I would typically have the student change the message so they can understand what a string is. So like, hey, a string is a data type. You can tell it's a string because it's got these two quotation marks, and anything in between it is the data that you're passing into the computer to tell. Like I said, if you want the whole complete lesson, you can go ahead and go through string variables. We talk about coding your own message, the outputs, and then eventually what this particular lesson does is it walks them through dot notation. They can actually change the color. Let's see if this plays real quick. So you can see like as things are playing, eventually they can create parts like that have kind of a disco fun party effect, and then they'll just loop forever and ever. So it's kind of a really cool project that can be done within just a couple of hours. And then you can duplicate it out and you learn a little bit more about parents and children, depending on age range. So that's one way in which you can scale this particular lesson. Okay, so we went through that. Any questions so far? Okay. If you're working with younger students, kind of the next level up is just letting them express themselves and create bigger, better worlds. My favorite lesson to give them is the creating historical landmark, because you get to build, you can have them go research a historical landmark online, have them draw out their plan, and then recreate it in studio using these same basic parts. Terrain is always a winner, and I'm gonna actually demonstrate real quick how to use terrain. I'm gonna stay in my same project right now. So you can start with just like a blank green slate, which is pretty easy. Or because when you're working with terrain, you can actually bring up terrain by going to the view, terrain. And if you go to edit, you can click add. But remember, things kind of appear in the center, so you can see how it's way far away. I'm gonna undo that. An easy way to give it something to latch onto, to grab, is to go ahead and take, let's say, and select this part here, duplicate it with Control D. I'm gonna turn off collisions real quick. I'm actually gonna make myself just kind of a nice large part. And the nice thing here is like now I can paint on top of this part. This is also good if you're familiar with gray boxing. This is actually how we usually gray box. We'll just sort of make things with our basic parts to figure out where things are, and then we'll bring in our other tools. So now I can actually go ahead back to our train, and now I can just draw on top of that. And it'll just, now it's got something to like grab onto. So we've got all these cool tools here, and it's just like, you can just draw over, you can smooth it out. Go ahead and paint new textures on it. Like if I want this to be leaf, oh, that's already leafy, so that's not really impressive. But you can go ahead and paint on it to make it look real. You can also draw water. So that's a really good way. It's a lot of fun to just sit there and like draw out a whole new world. This part is now actually anchored, and if I play test, you can see what it looks like. So just like that, I've got some water. You can actually swim in it. I've got a little bit of land. And then if it's here, like this is actually kind of a nice way to like, you can combine this with your obby to get going. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and stop. So once again, if you're working with younger students, I would probably, rather than having them go upwards into coding, I would probably just get into more advanced building and creation, like having them actually think critically about what they're building, creating more complex things like buildings, like I said, the Parthenon, or recreating historical landmarks.
Yeah. Oh, that was great, Genevieve. Thank you very much. And so yeah, it looks like we are exactly at time now. So again, I wanted to thank you all for attending today. Thank you for your great questions, for participating. Really appreciate it. Yeah, really having a good time with these. And again, thank you, Genevieve, for putting this all together. So again, just want to give you a couple more reminders. In 2 weeks, we will be doing our next and last session of this particular series. And yes, we will go over some more advanced topics because this will be for slightly older students. So we will get a little bit more into coding and Lua there. And again, everything that's going to be part of this series will be hosted on education.roblox.com with both the recordings of the webinar and our slides. So please feel free to go there, send them to your friends and colleagues. Definitely want to make sure that they have access to all these materials because, again, all of our materials that we put on education.roblox.com is free. We definitely want this to be used. We want you all to use it and, yeah, teach kids how to do all this stuff. So, yeah, again, thank you everyone so much for attending, and I hope you stay healthy and stay safe.
Thank you. Glad to hear it.